A bankrupt millionaire allowed a homeless girl to spend the night in his cheese shop. When he returned in the morning, he could not believe what the girl had been able to do. The rain was pouring heavily that afternoon in the Texas city, drenching the sidewalks and making the movement on the streets almost non-existent. Inside the small cheese shop, Bryant stared at the envelope in his hands with an expression that mixed disbelief and despair. CH, 62 years old, the grey-haired man with fair brown skin, found himself facing the worst nightmare of his life. Total bankruptcy of his business, the sustenance of decades. That space was not just a store. It was the symbol of his struggle, of sleepless nights and battles against an increasingly competitive market. How did it all come to this point? I worked so hard, sacrificed so much, and now all that's left is this emptiness, thought Bryant, as his eyes went from the letter to the empty counter where the fresh cheeses used to be. Bryant, we need a decision. Him wasn't just another stranger, but someone who was about to become a part of his life in a way he still couldn't understand. Who are you? Clara Bryant murmured, not taking his eyes off the small detail, feeling that his life somehow had just changed. The sound of the rain continued to beat heavily against the window pane, filling the environment with a melancholic melody that seemed to echo Bryant's mood. He looked at the girl lying on the small sofa in the cheese shop, wrapped in a blanket that Agatha had hurriedly found. Her wet hair was still dripping, forming small puddles on the worn floor, while her furrowed face indicated a restless sleep. Bryant ran his hand through his grey hair, trying to brush off the weight of the questions that haunted him. She can't stay here. It's not safe. We don't have the resources. But where else would she go in a storm like this? He thought, as his gaze returned to the engraved bracelet. Bryant, you can't just leave her here. She's just a child. She needs help. Agatha S. Her holding her hand. Clara, can you hear me? Stay strong, little one. We're here with you, he said, the concern evident in every word. Suddenly, Clara's body began to shake violently. Bryant's eyes widened, his heart racing as he held her. Agatha, she's having a seizure. Do something, he shouted, holding the girl carefully, trying to prevent her from getting hurt. Agatha ran to get something that could help, but the sight before Bryant was terrifying. He held the girl firmly, but the feeling of helplessness consumed him. Clara, please don't give up. Stay with me. You need to fight, he whispered as the tremor seemed to take over her entire body. The heavy silence of the cheese shop was now replaced by the sound of despair, the struggle for life that seemed to slowly slip away. Agatha returned with a clean cloth and tried to assist Bryant, but the look in her eyes made it clear that the situation was dire. As the rain pounded outside, Bryant held Clara in his arms, feeling more lost than ever. I won't let you go, see. We need to find another solution, Agatha said, sinking into the chair beside Bryant. Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed the weight of their predicament. Bryant looked at her, his face a mask of weariness and despair. Agatha, I feel like we're racing against time, but we don't have the resources to win this race. What else can we do? Who can we ask for help? We're alone here. His voice was heavy with bitterness, each word laced with frustration. Suddenly, I can't control you. Hair, do you need to check on the dined? A shrill alarm pierced the air from the room where Clara was being monitored. Hurried footsteps followed, accompanied by alarmed voices. Bryant shot up immediately, his heart pounding as Dr. Cedric reappeared in the doorway. The doctor's expression sent a chill through Bryant's veins. She's deteriorating rapidly. "I need you both to come now," Dr. Cedric said, urgently, before turning and rushing back inside. Bryant and Agatha followed him into the room to find Clara lying on the gurney, her frail body struggling to breathe. "Everything I have isn't enough to save her. How did we even get to this point?" Agatha sighed, pulling up a chair beside him. "We got to this point because you care, Bryant. But sometimes caring for someone means making sacrifices that seem impossible." Her words lingered in Bryant's mind long after she left the hospital that night. As he walked down the dimly lit streets, the cold biting at his face, one thought refused to leave his head. How am I going to get the money for the medicine? He stopped in front of a jewelry store, staring at the wedding ring on his finger, the last tangible piece of the life he had built with his late wife. It gleamed faintly under the streetlights, a symbol of love and memories. But at that moment, Clara's survival felt far more important. "I promised to take care of her," he muttered to himself. "What's the worth of a memory if I can't save a life?" With a heavy heart, Ryan stepped into the store. The clerk eyed him curiously as he removed the ring from him. "I don't disagree with your concerns," she admitted cautiously. "But the reality is, the resources here are limited. If there's another way, another plan, we're open to hearing it." Bryant clenched his fists, resolve burning in his chest. There had to be another way. For Clara, he would move mountains, or tear them down if he had to. "Ask, explain. We need to find another solution," Agatha said, sinking into the chair beside him. Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed the weight of their predicament. Bryant looked at her, his face a mask of weariness and despair. "Agatha, I feel like we're racing against time, but we don't even have the resources to win this race. What else can we do? Who can we ask for help? We're alone here," he replied, bitterness seeping through every word. Suddenly, a shrill alarm pierced the air from the room where Clara was being monitored. It was followed by hurried footsteps and alarmed voices. Agatha entered quietly, holding a small cup of coffee. Without a word, she handed it to Bryant, her own exhaustion etched deeply into her features. The dark circles under her eyes spoke volumes about the toll this ordeal had taken on her. Bryant accepted the coffee, but didn't take his eyes off Clara. "Agatha, if she doesn't get better soon, I don't know what else I'll do. Everything I have isn't enough to save her." "How did we get to this point?" he asked, his voice heavy with anguish. Agatha sighed, pulling up a chair to sit beside him. "We got to this point because you care, Bryant. But sometimes caring for someone means making sacrifices, ones that seem impossible." Her words lingered in Bryant's mind long after they left the hospital that night. The cold bit at his face as he walked down dimly lit streets, the idea of securing money for Clara's treatment refusing to leave his thoughts. He paused in front of a jewelry store, staring at the wedding ring on his finger. It gleamed faintly. "With all due respect, Clara has just been through an extremely traumatic situation. Removing her from here now will only worsen her health and emotional state. Why don't we work together to find a solution that truly helps?" Agatha's tone was calm but resolute, despite the exhaustion evident in her posture. Rosa hesitated, glancing between them. "I don't disagree with your concerns," she admitted slowly, "but the reality is we need a sustainable plan. If there's another way..." "There is another way," Bryant interrupted, his voice steely. And we're going to find it, together. As they stood there, united in their determination, Bryant realized that giving up wasn't an option. Not for Clara, and not for the future they were fighting so desperately to protect. Ask, explain. Bryant's jaw tightened as Rosa spoke, her explanation polished but hollow. My job is to ensure she's in a safe environment, she said matter-of-factly. This hospital can't keep her for much longer, and the costs need to be considered. There's a shelter that can take her immediately. They have resources for cases like this. Bryant's eyes narrowed, suspicion prickling at the edges of his mind. What's the name of this shelter? He demanded, his voice sharp with mistrust. I want to know exactly where you're thinking of sending her. Rosa hesitated, her reluctance palpable before she finally answered. It's the Hope Shelter. They deal with abandoned children and offer basic medical assistance. It's a good option, she added, though her words lacked conviction. The moment Rosa mentioned the name, Agatha visibly paled. Bryant caught it instantly, his protective instincts flaring. He turned to her urgently. Agatha, what's wrong? Do you know this? We're here with you. Clara tried to smile, though her body remained weak. I thought I'd never wake up again, she murmured, her voice hoarse but alive. Across the room, Agatha stirred a pot of soup, her movements slow but deliberate. She glanced at Clara with a gentle smile, though exhaustion shadowed her eyes. Clara, you were very lucky. And Bryant here didn't leave your side for a minute. You owe him your life. Bryant flushed slightly, shaking his head. Don't say that. She fought alone. I just did what anyone would do. As Clara sipped the warm broth, her gaze wandered around the space, taking in the empty shelves and abandoned equipment. You used to make cheese here? She asked, curiosity lighting her weary face. Bryant nodded, pulling up a chair beside her. Yes, but things went wrong. I lost everything. Now, only memories remain. His voice carried a bitterness he couldn't quite hide. Clara tilted her head, her eyes shining with something Bryant couldn't immediately place. Not just for themselves, but for Clara too. Ask, explain. You don't understand, Rosa insisted. Her tone clipped but professional. My job is to ensure she's in a safe environment. This hospital can't keep her for much longer, not with the costs mounting and resources stretched thin. There's a shelter that can take her in immediately. They have the means to handle cases like this. Bryant narrowed his eyes, suspicion prickling at the edges of his mind. Something about her explanation felt off. Too convenient, too dismissive. He crossed his arms, his voice firm as steel. What's the name of this shelter? I want to know exactly where you're thinking of sending her. Rosa hesitated, her reluctance palpable. Finally, she sighed and said, It's the Hope Shelter. They deal with abandoned children and offer basic medical assistance. It's a good option. The moment the words left her lips, Agatha's face went pale. Bryant caught it instantly. The sharp intake of breath, the wah. We're here with you. Clara tried to smile, though her body was still weak. I thought I'd never wake up again, she murmured, her voice hoarse but full of life. On the other side of the room, Agatha stirred a pot of hot soup, using the few ingredients they had left. She glanced at Clara with a gentle smile, though her expression betrayed the weariness accumulated over days of relentless worry. Clara, you were very lucky, Agatha said, placing the bowl on the table. And Bryant here didn't leave your side for a minute. You owe him your life. Bryant shook his head, a faint blush tinting his cheeks. Don't say that. She fought alone. I just did what anyone would do. He helped Clara sit up, steadying her as she sipped the warm soup. As Clara drank, her gaze wandered around the factory, taking in the empty shelves and abandoned equipment. "You used to make cheese here?" she asked, curiosity lighting up her tired eyes. Bryant nodded, pulling up a chair to sit beside her. "Yeah, but..." Bryant observed the scene, a quiet pride swelling within him. "She's got talent," he thought to himself. "Maybe more than she realizes." When the first wheel of cheese was finally formed, Bryant cut a small piece and tasted it. A slow smile spread across his face. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. A glimmer of possibility in a world that had tried so hard to break them. For the first time in years, Bryant felt a spark of hope. Perhaps, together, they could rebuild not just the cheese factory, but their lives. Ask, explain. The cheese they had crafted together was more than just a product. It was proof of progress. Bryant examined a piece, his lips curving into an approving smile. "Clara, this is really good. You've learned so fast," he said, pride evident in his voice. The compliment made Clara blush, but she shrugged modestly. "I just did what you taught me." Yet the sparkle in her eyes betrayed her growing confidence. She was starting to believe in herself. With their small production underway, Bryant decided it was time to test the waters. He arranged the cheeses in an improvised basket and set out to visit old acquaintances, hoping to rebuild trust with customers who still remembered the family name. Meanwhile, back at the cheese factory, Agatha and Clara worked tirelessly, perfecting techniques and refining flavors. But Agatha's strength was waning. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the temperature of the aging room, and dark circles shadowed her eyes. Noticing this, Clara stepped forward. Clara leaned in, sensing his tension. "What's wrong? Is it something important?" Bryant exhaled slowly before speaking. Ernesto. He was supposed to be a loyal friend. But these documents show he embezzled money from the cheese factory to fund other businesses. My father never knew about this. His voice cracked under the weight of betrayal. Clara placed a comforting hand on his arm. Maybe your father kept these papers here for a day when he could resolve everything. But now, Bryant, it's your chance to use this information to save what he built. Her words surprised him. Not just the wisdom they carried, but the determination in her young voice. He looked at her, admiration softening his features. "You're right, Clara, but that doesn't change the fact that these papers reveal how deeply my family was betrayed. Ernesto took more than money. He stole my father's trust in people." Carefully placing the documents back in the box, they continued searching. It wasn't long before Clara unearthed. Bryant's voice was firm but breathless as he spoke, his resolve wavering under the weight of Agatha's stubbornness. He watched her for a moment before shaking his head in resignation. "You're stubborn, Agatha, but I promise I won't let you ignore this for long," he said, trying to mask his concern with determination. As they worked, the atmosphere seemed to shift, infused with a sense of progress. Bryant and Clara were deep in the process, experimenting with old techniques using what little they had available. Agatha guided them as best she could, sharing details of traditions passed down through generations. "This cheese needs patience," Agatha would say, her tone steady and wise. "It's like life. If you rush it, it won't turn out right." Clara listened intently, her eyes wide with admiration. Bryant smiled, feeling a renewed connection to his family's legacy. "If this works, Agatha, it will be because of everything you've taught us," he replied, gratitude softening his voice. With deliberate care, she opened it, revealing a bundle of aged bills. Bryant's eyes widened in shock. "Agatha, what is this? Where did you get this money?" he asked, incredulous. Agatha sighed, sinking into a chair with effort. "It's my savings. It's not much, but it's enough to prevent Clara from going to that shelter. I don't want her to go through what I went through, Bryant." Her voice cracked with emotion. "I can't." Bryant looked at her, torn between gratitude and guilt. "Agatha, that's your security. What if things get worse? You have your own health to take care of. I can't accept this." "You will accept it," Agatha insisted, gripping his hands firmly, tears glistening in her eyes. "Because saving Clara is more important than anything that money could give me. She deserves a chance." As their discussion continued, a knock on the door caught everyone's attention. Dr. Cedric entered the kitchen, briefcase in hand, his expression grave. "I heard what's happening, Bryant. I want Bryant. Lay her on the floor. She needs immediate medical attention. Where's the oxygen? We need to stabilize her." As Dr. Cedric attended to Agatha, Bryant looked around the chaotic kitchen, his mind racing. The choices before him felt unbearable. Save the woman who had given so much to keep their family together, or protect the child who had become part of their lives. Each decision came with its own cost, and the clock was ticking relentlessly. Ask, explain. Clara, who was frozen in the corner of the room. He felt the weight of the choice before him grow even heavier. If we lose Agatha, if we lose the cheese factory, and if we lose Clara, how will I ever forgive myself? He thought, struggling to hold back tears. Dr. Cedric looked at him, his expression serious. Bryant, we need to decide now. Agatha can't go on like this without treatment, and Clara needs a safe home. What are you going to do? The silence in the kitchen was broken only by Agatha's labored breathing and the sound of the impending decision pounding in Bryant's mind. He looked at Agatha's money, at Clara, and at the recipe book on the table. Each choice seemed like a defeat in some way. I need to find a way to save all of you. I can't leave anyone behind, he finally said, his voice carrying a determination he could barely sustain. But he knew the battle was far from over. The air in the oncology ward of the hospital was dense, laden with a gravity that seemed to weigh heavier on Bryant with every step. Ran toward the building, only to find flames beginning to spread across the walls. His heart raced, and he shouted into the void, "No, it can't be, not now!" as the flames consumed the work of a lifetime. Bryant felt the force of the blow. First Agatha, then Clara, and now the cheese factory. He wondered if there was anything else he could lose. But deep in his mind, a single certainty guided him. He had to save Clara, no matter the cost. He turned and ran toward the road, determination burning stronger than the flames he left behind. The flames roared like a wild beast as they devoured the factory, interior of the cheese factory. Bryant stood outside, eyes wide as smoke rose in swirls into the night sky. The heat was suffocating, and the dancing shadows of the flame reflected his growing despair. Without time to think, he shouted for help, running toward the main door. "I can't lose this too. Someone help me, please." His voice cut through the chaos, but felt small in the face of the fire's fury. As he tried to force the door, Bryant's mind was a battlefield, torn between his gnawing worry for Agatha and a creeping suspicion that Rosa, or someone tied to her, might be behind the fire. His knuckles whitened as he gripped the steering wheel, anger and fear wrestling for dominance in his chest. If she did this, he thought darkly, she'll pay. But first he reminded himself fiercely, I need to make sure Agatha is all right. The shadow of what had happened at the cheese factory loomed larger with every mile, threatening to consume him whole. The night wasn't over yet, and Bryant knew deep down that the worst was still ahead. The hospital room was bathed in an eerie half-light, the kind that made everything feel suspended between life and death. Agatha's breathing came slow and uneven. Each laboured inhale, punctuated by the relentless beeping of monitors that seemed to grow louder with every passing second. Bryant burst into the room, his footsteps echoing sharply against the tiled floor. His eyes locked onto the... Fury burned in his eyes. Don't you have any shame? She's at death's door, and all you can think about is taking Clara away from us. Rosa crossed her arms, unfazed. I'm just doing my job. Agatha's situation doesn't change the fact that Clara needs to be in an appropriate place. Bryant's blood boiled, but before he could retaliate, Dr. Cedric entered the room. His commanding presence filled the space immediately. Rosa, you can't just barge into a hospital room with police officers. This woman is gravely ill, and you're making the situation worse. Rosa raised an eyebrow, unyielding. Doctor, I have a court order. I won't discuss the merits of my job with you. Dr. Cedric didn't back down. And I have a duty to ensure that patients under my care aren't subjected to unnecessary stress. Your approach is anything but ethical. He moved closer to Agatha, checking her vital signs while casting a disapproving glance at Rosa. Bryant looked at the doctor with gratitude, feeling a sliver of... Later, in the quiet solitude of... The night was heavy, cloaked in shadows that seemed to stretch and twist like living things. Bryant's mind raced between two storms, the gnawing worry for Agatha and a growing suspicion that Rosa, or someone tied to her, might have been behind the fire. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white, anger and fear warring within him like thunderclouds colliding. If she's responsible, he thought darkly, she'll pay. But first, Agatha, she had to be okay. As he drove, the memory of the cheese factory loomed larger in his rearview mirror, its charred remains casting a metaphorical shadow over everything. It felt as though it were chasing him, threatening to swallow him whole. The night wasn't done with him yet, and deep down, Bryant knew the worst was still ahead. The hospital room was bathed in an eerie half-light, the kind that made every corner seem darker than it should be. Machines beeped rhythmically around Agatha. Agatha, I promise. No matter what, I'll protect Clara. She'll never be alone. For a moment, she closed her eyes, as if his words offered some small measure of peace. When she spoke again, her voice was barely audible. Thank you, Bryant. That's all I needed to hear. Before he could respond, the door swung open with a sharp bang. Rosa strode in, flanked by two police officers. Her steps were deliberate, her gaze fixed on Bryant, like a predator sizing up its prey. Mr. Bryant, she announced coldly, I've come to pick up Clara. You can no longer delay this process. Bryant shot to his feet, positioning himself between Agatha and Rosa. Fury burned in his veins. Do you have no shame? She's dying, and all you can think about is taking Clara away from us. Rosa crossed her arms, unfazed. I'm just doing my job. Agatha's situation doesn't change the fact that Clara needs to be in an appropriate place. Before Bryant could retaliate, Dr. Cedric entered the room, his presence commanding an... Agatha, you can't give up now, he pleaded, his voice breaking. You can't leave me alone. From across the room, Rosa watched silently, her expression unreadable. Bryant glared at her, rage and despair mixing into a toxic cocktail. Are you seeing this? Do you still think Clara needs to be taken away now? What's the limit of your cruelty? But Rosa said nothing, her silence cutting deeper than any retort could. The heart monitor's beeping grew slower, more irregular, until finally a long, unbroken tone filled the room. Time seemed to stop. Bryant stared at Agatha, his vision blurring with tears. "No," he whispered hoarsely, shaking his head. "No." Later, in the quiet solitude of the hospital chapel, Bryant sat alone, the muffled sound of his own sobs filling the air. Outside, dawn began to break, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. But inside, the darkness remained, clinging to him like a second skin. Ask, explain. Bryant sat in the dimly lit chapel, his "We'll rebuild everything. Clara's fine, and I won't let anything bad happen to her. I promise." Agatha sighed deeply, her expression growing serious. "Bryant, I know I don't have much time left. You don't need to lie to me. I just want you to listen." Her voice took on an urgency that made his chest tighten. "Clara needs you. She has no one but us, and you're the only person who can give her the future she deserves. Promise me you'll take care of her, no matter what happens." Tears spilled down her cheeks, and Bryant felt his own throat constrict. Swallowing hard, he nodded. "Agatha, I promise. No matter what happens, I'll protect Clara. She'll never be alone." For a brief moment, Agatha closed her eyes, as though his vow brought her some measure of peace. "Thank you, Bryant. That's all I needed to hear," she whispered, her voice fading into the silence. Before Bryant could respond, the door flew open with a sharp creak. Rosa strode in. "Clara can't go to that place." Bryant crouched beside her once more, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "Agatha, don't worry about that now. Clara's here, and no one's going to take her away from us." But even as he said the words, they felt hollow, more an attempt to convince himself than reassure her. Suddenly, the heart monitor began emitting a frantic, irregular rhythm. Bryant's stomach dropped as he realized something was terribly wrong. "Doctor!" "Something's happening! Do something, please!" he cried, panic rising in his chest. Dr. Cedric pressed the emergency button, his movements swift and precise as nurses flooded the room. Bryant clung to Agatha's hand, watching helplessly as her life slipped further away. The room buzzed with activity, shouts, equipment whirring. But Bryant couldn't tear his eyes from her. "Agatha, you can't give up now," he pleaded, his voice breaking. "You can't leave me alone." As chaos consumed the room, Rosa stood silently in the corner, her ear. The sound grew louder with every passing second, as if mocking Bryant's helplessness. He rushed into the room, his footsteps echoing sharply on the tiled floor, his eyes fixed on the pale, weary figure lying there. The woman, who had been his partner in struggle for so many years. He approached her bedside and took her hand, startled by how cold it felt. "Agatha," he said urgently, leaning closer. "I'm here. Talk to me. Please. You said something was wrong. What happened?" He tried to keep his voice steady, but panic clawed at the edges of his words. Agatha opened her eyes slowly, a faint smile forming despite the obvious pain etched across her face. "Bryant," she murmured, her voice weak but laced with affection. "You always arrive on time." He knelt beside her bed, gripping her hand tighter. "Of course I do. You're not getting rid of me that easily." His attempt at confidence faltered under the weight of reality. Deep down, Bryant knew this woman is gravely ill, and you're making the situation worse. Rosa raised an eyebrow but held her ground. "Doctor, I have a court order. I won't discuss the merits of my job with you." Dr. Cedric didn't back down. And I have a duty to ensure that patients under my care aren't subjected to unnecessary stress. This approach of yours is anything but ethical. He moved to Agatha's side, checking her vital signs while casting a protective glance toward Bryant. For the first time since entering the hospital, Bryant felt a flicker of gratitude and solidarity. Despite her frailty, Agatha summoned the strength to speak again. "Rosa, Clara can't go to that place," she mumbled, her voice barely audible. Bryant crouched beside her once more, trying to soothe her. "Agatha, don't worry about that now. Clara's here, and no one's going to take her away from us." But even as he spoke, the words felt hollow. "I knew that place was a nightmare," he growled, guilt weighing heavily on him. "And now Clara's there, alone, and I can't even visit her." Dr. Cedric met his gaze, his expression grim but resolute. "This isn't over, Bryant. We have evidence now, and I'm taking it to the authorities. But you need to prepare yourself. It's going to be a long battle." Bryant clenched his fists, his jaw set. "I'll fight, Doctor, no matter how long it takes or what I have to sacrifice. Clara deserves better than this." Just as Bryant processed the gravity of their situation, his phone buzzed. An unknown sender had sent a message containing a video attachment and a single line: "See what's happening to Clara." With trembling hands, Bryant pressed play. What he saw stole his breath. In the dimly lit room, Clara sat huddled in a corner, her clothes dirty, her eyes swollen from crying. An angry woman loomed over her, shouting while another child darted past, clutching what looked like food. When the woman shoved Clara, "I knew that place was a nightmare," he growled, guilt weighing heavily on him. "And now Clara's there, alone, and I can't even visit her." Dr. Cedric met his gaze, his expression grim but resolute. "This isn't over, Bryant. We have evidence now, and I'm taking it to the authorities. But you need to prepare yourself. It's going to be a long battle." Bryant clenched his fists, his jaw set. "I'll fight, Doctor, no matter how long it takes or what I have to sacrifice. Clara deserves better than this." Just as Bryant processed the gravity of their situation, his phone buzzed. An unknown sender had sent a message containing a video attachment and a single line: "See what's happening to Clara." With trembling hands, Bryant pressed play. What he saw stole his breath. In the dimly lit room, Clara sat huddled in a corner, her clothes dirty, her eyes swollen from crying. An angry woman loomed over her, shouting while another child darted past, clutching what looked like food. When the woman shoved Clara, the night air was cold as he parked his car near the shelter, its lit windows glowing like mocking eyes in the darkness. He sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel tightly, the video of Clara replaying in his mind like a broken record. There was no time to waste, no room for hesitation. "If no one else is going to save her," he muttered under his breath, adjusting the cap on his head and pulling his heavy coat tighter around him, "then I'll do it myself. I can't fail Clara now." With that resolve burning in his chest, Bryant stepped out of the car and moved toward the back entrance of the shelter. The building loomed before him, its high fences and air of abandonment screaming neglect. It felt like a place where hope went to die, a place where no one cared about what happened inside. Bryant found an unlocked window, likely left open by carelessness or haste, and slipped inside without a sound. The interior was dark and chaotic, the smell of stale food mingling with disinfect. "I let this happen." Finally, Dr. Cedric emerged, his expression serious but controlled. His lab coat was stained, but his calm demeanor betrayed none of the urgency Bryant knew he must be feeling. "Clara is in critical but stable condition for now, the doctor explained. The fall caused internal injuries and she'll need urgent surgery. We've already called in the surgical team, but time is essential. Brian nodded numbly, his mind racing. All he could do now was wait and pray that Clara would pull through. Ask explain near the shelter, he lingered in the shadows, his eyes fixed on the building. Its lit windows glowed like mocking beacons against the night, taunting his helplessness. But hesitation wasn't an option, not with Clara's face burned into his mind. He couldn't afford to waste another second. Wearing a heavy coat, he adjusted the cap pulled low over his forehead and checked his phone one last time. The message was clear. If no one else would save her, I let this happen. Finally, Dr. Cedric emerged, his expression serious but controlled. His lab coat was stained, but his calm demeanor betrayed none of the urgency Brian knew he must be feeling. Clara is in critical but stable condition for now, the doctor explained. The fall caused internal injuries and she'll need urgent surgery. We've already called in the surgical team, but time is essential. Bryant nodded numbly, his mind racing. All he could do now was wait and pray that Clara would pull through. Ask, explain. Near the shelter, he lingered in the shadows, his eyes fixed on the building. Its lit windows glowed like mocking beacons against the night, taunting his helplessness. But hesitation wasn't an option, not with Clara's face burned into his mind. He couldn't afford to waste another second. Wearing a heavy coat, he adjusted the cap pulled low over his forehead and checked his phone one last time. The message was clear. If no one else would save her. The dried blood on his shirt served as a cruel reminder that despite everything, she was still fighting for her life. She can't die, he thought desperately, staring at the emergency room doors. Not after all we've been through. I let this happen. Finally, Dr. Cedric emerged, his expression serious but calm. Bryant rose instantly, bracing himself for the news. Clara is in critical but stable condition for now, the doctor explained. The fall caused internal injuries. The dried blood on his shirt served as a cruel reminder that despite everything, she was still fighting for her life. The fall caused internal injuries for now, the doctor explained. The fall caused internal injuries. The fall caused internal injuries for now, the doctor explained, letting you realize that Bryant had let him down. Finally, Dr. Cedric emerged. And she'll need urgent surgery. We've already called the surgical team, but time is essential. Bryant nodded numbly, feeling the weight of guilt and fear pressing down on him. The dried blood on his shirt served as a cruel reminder that despite everything, she was still fighting for her life. She can't die, he thought desperately, staring at the emergency room doors. Not after all we've been through. I let this happen. Finally, Dr. Cedric emerged, his expression serious but calm. Bryant rose instantly, bracing himself for the news. Clara is in critical but stable condition for now, the doctor explained. The fall caused internal injuries. And she'll need urgent surgery. We'd already called the surgical team, but time is essential. Bryant nodded numbly, feeling the weight of guilt and fear pressing down on him. As the doctor disappeared back into the ER, Bryant sank back into the chair, praying silently. For the first time in years, he felt truly powerless, but also resolved. If Clara made it through this, he vowed to ensure no child ever faced such danger again. Ask, explain. Bryant couldn't sit still any longer. His heart pounded uncontrollably as he stood up, desperation clawing at his chest. "Surgery, she's going to survive, isn't she? Please, doctor, tell me she has a chance." His voice trembled with raw emotion, every word laced with fear and hope. Dr. Cedric placed a steady hand on Bryant's shoulder, offering what little reassurance he could muster. "Clara is strong," he said firmly, his tone blending empathy with authority. "She's overcome many things that other children couldn't. But we need to act quickly, and that means you have to stay calm. If you freak out, it won't help anyone." Bryant nodded slowly, taking a deep, shaky breath in an attempt to steady himself against the crushing wave of despair. "If Clara survives," he murmured, almost as if speaking to himself, "I promise that nothing will hurt her again. Not the world, not these people who only want to use her." Before Dr. Cedric could respond, 2 police officers entered the hallway. Rosa T. Cedric nodded quickly. "She's waking up, but she's still very weak. Brian, stay here. I'll sort this out and come back for Clara." With that, he followed the nurse down the hall toward Agatha's room. Bryant tried to sit down again, but the officers remained close, their watchful eyes making him feel trapped. Rosa lingered nearby, her distrust palpable, as though she knew her position was precarious. "It's only a matter of time until everything you've done comes to light, Rosa." Bryant spat, glaring at her. "You can try to silence me, but you won't escape the truth." Rosa smiled coldly but didn't respond, turning on her heel and disappearing down the corridor. Left alone with his thoughts, Bryant felt the weight of the world pressing down on him. Moments later, Dr. Cedric returned, his expression tired but carrying a glimmer of good news. "Agatha is conscious. She asked for you and Clara. She's weak, but I think she'll recover over time." And felt a small spark of relief ignite with. The fluorescent lights of the hospital corridor buzzed overhead, casting a sterile glow over Bryant as he paced anxiously. His mind was a storm of emotions: fear, guilt, and an unyielding determination to save Clara. If giving every drop of his blood could keep her alive, then so be it. She was all that mattered. "She's what matters," he muttered under his breath as the technician finished drawing another unit of blood. The procedure left him lightheaded. But Bryant barely noticed. As soon as he was dismissed, he returned to the hallway, watching through the glass as the medical team prepared Clara for surgery. Every movement they made seemed deliberate, precise, a choreography of hope against despair. Meanwhile, in Agatha's room, something unexpected unfolded. Weak but resolute, Agatha sat upright in bed, with a notepad clutched tightly in her trembling hands. Her pen scratched furiously across the page, detailing everything she knew about Rosa, the woman who had manipulated the System T. The fluorescent lights of the hospital corridor buzzed overhead, casting a sterile glow over Bryant as he paced anxiously. His mind was a storm of emotions: fear, guilt, and an unyielding determination to save Clara. If giving every drop of his blood could keep her alive, then so be it. She was all that mattered. "She's what matters," he muttered under his breath as the technician finished drawing another unit of blood. The procedure left him lightheaded. But Bryant barely noticed. As soon as he was dismissed, he returned to the hallway, watching through the glass as the medical team prepared Clara for surgery. Every movement they made seemed deliberate, precise, a choreography of hope against despair. Meanwhile, in Agatha's room, something unexpected unfolded. Weak but resolute, Agatha sat upright in bed with a notepad clutched tightly in her trembling hands. Her pen scratched furiously across the page, detailing everything she knew about Rosa, the woman who had manipulated the System T. Brian's smile was faint, almost imperceptible. but it didn't reach his eyes. Pain lingered there, sharp and unyielding. "She's my family now," he said quietly, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. "And you fight for family." Inside the surgical center, the tension was palpable. Dr. Cedric's calm demeanor masked the mounting pressure as Clara's vital signs began to waver. The monitors beeped erratically, each sound a reminder of how fragile life could be. "The heartbeat is dropping. Prepare the defibrillator and be ready to act quickly if necessary," Dr. Cedric ordered, his hands moving with precision over the instruments. His mind raced, calculating every move, knowing that Clara had already reached her limit. One wrong step, one misjudgment, and it would all unravel. "You're not giving up now, little one," he murmured under his breath, his jaw tightening with determination. "I won't let that happen." In the hallway, Brian's thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of an off. Brian's smile was faint, almost imperceptible, but it didn't reach his eyes. Pain lingered there, sharp and unyielding. "She's my family now," he said quietly, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. "And you fight for family." Inside the surgical center, the tension was palpable. Dr. Cedric's calm demeanor masked the mounting pressure as Clara's vital signs began to waver. The monitors beeped erratically, each sound a reminder of how fragile life could be. "The heartbeat is dropping. Prepare the defibrillator and be ready to act quickly if necessary," Dr. Cedric ordered, his hands moving with precision over the instruments. His mind raced, calculating every move, knowing that Clara had already reached her limit. One wrong step, one misjudgment, and it would all unravel. "You're not giving up now, little one," he murmured under his breath, his jaw tightening with determination. "I won't let that happen." In the hallway, inside the operating room, the team's relentless efforts began to bear fruit. Clara's vitals stabilized slightly, offering a sliver of hope. Dr. Cedric seized the opportunity, pushing forward with the most delicate part of the procedure. Sweat trickled down his forehead as he worked, his concentration unwavering. "We're almost there," he muttered to the team. "Don't relax, we still need to get through this stage." He glanced at the monitor, marveling at the girl's resilience. "This girl has a will to live that I've never seen before," he remarked softly, his words tinged with awe. Outside, Agatha arrived in a wheelchair, insisting on being brought to Brian despite her own frailty. When Brian saw her, he rushed to her side, kneeling beside her chair. "Agatha, you should be resting. You don't need to worry about me." Her gaze locked onto his, fierce and resolute. "Brian, Clara needs us. Together, we're stronger that way. I won't give up on her, just as you never gave up on me." But deep down, he knew it wasn't up to him. "Clara," he whispered, leaning closer. "I don't know if you can hear me, but I need you to fight, not for me, but for yourself. You're the strongest person I've ever met. You've been through so much, and you've always come out on top. Please, don't stop fighting now." His voice broke, raw with emotion, but he pressed on. "You've got people who love you, who believe in you. We're waiting for you, Clara. Come back to us." In the sterile silence of the ICU, his words hung in the air, carried by hope and desperation. Somewhere beyond the monitors and machines, perhaps Clara heard him. And somewhere deep within her, the spark of survival flickered anew. "Ask, explain." Brian's smile was faint, almost imperceptible, but it didn't reach his eyes. Pain lingered there, a shadow behind the fleeting curve of his lips. "She's my family now," he said quietly, his voice steady despite the storm within him. "And you fight for family," Sid. "Clara, Fight. You've shown us you're stronger than anyone imagines. Don't give up now. With renewed focus, he returned to the task at hand, sweat trickling down his brow. Unaware of the gravity unfolding behind closed doors, Brian paced the hallway like a caged animal. Every second stretched into eternity, and frustration gnawed at him. Was there anything more he could do? Passing by the hospital chapel, he hesitated before stepping inside. Kneeling on the nearest pew, he bowed his head, his voice barely audible. God, I know I'm far from perfect, but I'm begging you, for Clara. She doesn't deserve any of this. Give her a chance. Please, I'll do whatever it takes. His prayer hung heavy in the air, a desperate plea for hope amidst despair. Back in the operating room, the team's relentless efforts began to yield results. Clara's vitals stabilized slightly, offering a narrow window of opportunity. Dr. Cedric seized it. Proceeding with the most delicate phase of the surgery. We're almost. Brian glanced at his watch repeatedly, each tick stretching into an agonizing eternity. Inside, Dr. Cedric fought tirelessly to save Clara, while outside, Bryant clung to faith, praying silently for a miracle. Finally, the door opened once more. Dr. Cedric emerged, pulling off his surgical mask. His face bore the exhaustion of battle, but there was a glimmer of triumph in his eyes. She's still with us. The surgery was successful, but we need to monitor her closely over the next 48 hours. Relief washed over Bryant, leaving his legs weak beneath him. Tears streamed down his face as he gripped Agatha's hands tightly. Thank you, Doctor. Thank you for not giving up on her. Dr. Cedric placed a reassuring hand on Bryant's shoulder. She's strong, Bryant, and so are you. Now take care of her when she wakes up. As the doctor walked away, Bryant looked at Agatha. She had manipulated the system to destroy lives, believing she could evade accountability. This ends today, he muttered, handing the documents to the social worker who stood nearby, still present at the hospital. Meanwhile, inside the operating room, complications arose. Clara's oxygen levels plummeted, alarming the team. She's destabilizing, Dr. Cedric barked. Increase the transfusion and adjust ventilation immediately. His voice carried a sharper edge now. Though he fought to maintain composure, the warning signs persisted, testing their resolve. Cedric closed his eyes briefly, drawing on every ounce of focus and calm within him. Clara, fight, he urged silently. You've already shown you're stronger than anyone imagines. Don't give up now. Unaware of the escalating crisis unfolding behind those sterile doors, Brian paced the hallway like a caged animal. Every second stretched into eternity. Was there anything more he could do? Passing by the chapel window, something compelled. She'll make it, Bryant. Clara is stronger than you imagine. Time seemed to grind to a halt as Brian waited, glancing at his watch repeatedly. Each minute felt like an hour. Inside, Dr. Cedric battled tirelessly to save Clara, while outside, Bryant clung to faith and hope. Finally, the door opened once more, and Dr. Cedric emerged, pulling off his surgical mask. His expression was serious, but carried a glimmer of triumph. She's still with us. The surgery was successful, but we need to monitor her closely over the next 48 hours. Relief washed over Bryant, leaving his legs weak beneath him. Tears streamed down his face as he gripped Agatha's hands tightly. Thank you, Doctor. Thank you for not giving up on her. Dr. Cedric nodded, placing a reassuring hand on Brian's shoulder. She's strong, Bryant, and so are you. Now take care of her when she wakes up. As the doctor walked away, Brian turned to Agatha, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he allowed himself to believe. I know you can beat this, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Agatha entered the room in her wheelchair, insisting on being present despite not having fully regained her strength. Her eyes filled with tears as she looked at Bryant and Clara. "Bryant," she said softly, placing a trembling hand on his shoulder. "She needs to feel that we're here, that we're not going anywhere." Bryant turned to her, his gaze heavy with guilt, but also gratitude. "Agatha, everything I did, everything I hid, it's time to tell it all. I can't carry this alone anymore." His voice cracked under the weight of years of secrets. Agatha nodded, encouraging him silently. Bryant took a deep breath, feeling the words lodge painfully in his throat. But he began to speak. "Years ago, when I lost my wife, I sank into debt trying to save the cheese factory. But I made mistakes, terrible ones. I took money from places I shouldn't have trusted, people who only wanted to destroy me." Ernesto, my father's partner, was back at the hospital. Dr. Cedric entered the medical ward with a contained smile, holding a tablet displaying confirmation of Rosa's arrest. "Bryant, you made it. Rosa was captured at the airport. The charges against you have been officially dropped, and now we can focus entirely on Clara." Relief mingled with lingering anxiety as Bryant responded, his eyes fixed on Clara. "Thank you, Doctor. But the only thing that matters now is that Clara survives. Everything else can wait." As Dr. Cedric adjusted the equipment parameters, a sudden shrill alarm pierced the air. Everyone froze. The monitors showed oxygen levels plummeting rapidly. "No oxygenation! Prepare the emergency team now!" Dr. Cedric shouted to the nurses. Bryant rushed to Clara's side, gripping her hand tightly. Tears streamed down his face as he pleaded desperately. "Clara, please stay with me. Don't give up now. Fight, little one. Fight with everything you have." The room erupted into chaos. Doctors and nurses, moving swift, muttered to himself as he pushed debris aside with his hands. Bryant reached the area where his father's old office used to be, now a pile of twisted metal and blackened papers. He began rummaging through partially intact drawers, driven by the memory that his father always said the most important documents should be well kept but never out of reach. After minutes that felt like hours, Bryant found a leather folder, miraculously intact, hidden under a fallen piece of cabinet. His hands were shaking as he opened the folder, revealing original cheese factory contracts, accounting records, and most importantly, the property deed. This could save everything. Maybe there's still hope," he whispered, his eyes brimming with a mixture of relief and despair as Bryant made his discovery. Clara began showing signs of consciousness in the hospital's intensive care unit. Her fingers moved slightly, and her eyes slowly opened, revealing the dim light from the ceiling. Agatha was by weight of responsibility increasing with each step. Clara was unconscious and her breathing was shallow, a constant reminder of the fragility of her condition. The corridors were filled with people in a panic. Patients, nurses, doctors, all trying to cope with the crisis caused by the blackout. He had to dodge abandoned stretchers and wheelchairs as he clung to Clara with all his strength. "Please, Clara, stay with me. Don't give up now. We're almost there," he murmured, as if his words could keep her conscious. However, the danger didn't come only from the storm and the lack of power. Rosa, who had managed to escape police custody, was in the hospital, moving through the shadows with a grim determination. She carried a backpack containing incriminating documents and seemed to know exactly where Bryant and Clara were. Rosa had no intention of leaving without finishing what she had started. Her steps were silent, but laden with purpose. "They think they've won, but I still have cards to play." Lightning tore through the sky, illuminating the hospital in jagged bursts of electric fury. Thunder roared, shaking the very foundations of the building, as if nature itself were conspiring against them. Then, with an ominous hum, the emergency generators failed, plunging the hospital into an even deeper darkness. The oppressive silence was broken only by distant voices and hurried footsteps echoing down the halls. Bryant stood frozen in the hallway, clutching Clara's hand tightly. His voice barely audible over the chaos, he whispered, "Please God, don't take anything else from me." He braced himself for fate's next blow, knowing full well that the battle wasn't over yet. 6 months later, the cheese shop was unrecognizable. What had once been a crumbling relic of loss and destruction now gleamed with fresh paint and new life. A sign above the entrance proudly bore the name Lee Esperanza, a name Bryant and Clara had chosen together. Outside, a small crowd buzzed with excitement, eager. When the presenter took the stage and announced Clara's name as the winner, the crowd erupted into applause. Bryant's chest swelled with pride as Clara stepped onto the stage, her eyes glistening with emotion. Holding the trophy aloft, she spoke directly to the two people who had changed her life forever. "This is for you, Bryant and Agatha," she said, her voice trembling. "You believed in me when no one else did, and that changed my life." Backstage, Agatha squeezed Bryant's hand tightly, tears streaming down her face. "She's our legacy, Bryant. Clara is proof that it's worth fighting for what matters." Bryant nodded, feeling more fulfilled than he ever thought possible. And it all started with a chance to do the right thing, to not give up. As Clara thanked the audience with a radiant smile, Bryant realized how far they'd come. After the ceremony, friends and neighbors gathered at the shop for a surprise celebration. Laughter filled the air. Clara stood at the threshold of a new beginning, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted a decorative basket on the counter. The morning sun bathed the rebuilt cheese shop in golden light, its freshly painted sign gleaming proudly. La Esperanza Traditional Cheese Shop. It was more than just a name. It was a promise, a testament to resilience and hope. Outside, a growing crowd buzzed with anticipation, their murmurs blending into an excited hum that filled the crisp air. Bryant stood beside her, adjusting his apron one last time. His eyes glistened as he took in the scene, the culmination of months of hard work, sacrifice, and heartache. Clara, radiant despite her nerves, fussed over the final details, arranging artisanal cheeses with meticulous care. Each wheel and wedge seemed to tell a story of love, determination, and renewal. "Nervous?" Bryant asked. Attempting a calm demeanor neither of them truly felt. Clara hesitated, then admitted softly, "A little." She turned to him, her. "She is our legacy, Bryant," Agatha whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Clara is proof that it's worth fighting for what matters." Bryant looked at her, his own eyes brimming with tears. And it all started with a chance to do the right thing, to not give up. After the ceremony, the celebration continued back at the shop. Friends, neighbors, and customers gathered for a surprise party, filling the space with laughter and conversation. Plates of artisanal cheeses circulated, each bite a reminder of the craftsmanship and passion poured into every product. Bryant watched Clara, now surrounded by neighborhood children, proudly displaying her trophy. He realized this wasn't just a celebration, it was confirmation. They had overcome every obstacle life had thrown at them. As night fell and the festivities wound down, Bryant and Clara found themselves alone in the kitchen, tidying up. Clara held the trophy close, running her fingers along its surface, taking orders with smiles on their faces. Agatha, seated near the window, observed it all with a look of deep satisfaction. Despite the difficulties they had faced, they were finally in a place of peace and fulfillment. Bryant looked at his family and felt a sense of completeness he had never experienced before. The future seemed bright for them. Clara would continue to grow as a talented cheesemaker, honoring the traditions that Agatha so valued. Bryant was determined to keep the cheese factory thriving and create an environment where Clara could shine even more. And Agatha, despite her frail health, found joy in seeing the family's legacy flourish. As Bryant turned off the lights at the cheese factory that night, he looked at the sign illuminated by the moonlight. La Esperanza was not just a name, it was what sustained them at every step of this journey. With a sigh of relief and gratitude, he closed the door, knowing that together they could face anything. After all, David Ryan huddled against the cold, damp wall of the orphanage, his scrawny 12-year-old body trembling as he watched the staff bustle down the dimly lit corridor. His tanned skin bore fresh bruises, and his usually bright, honey-brown eyes now reflected a deep-seated fear. Through the barred window, David saw rain begin to fall, each drop mingling with his resolve. "I can't live like this anymore," he whispered to himself, his voice barely audible over the storm brewing outside. Being mistreated, humiliated every day. They may have taken my food again today. They may have pushed me and called me useless. But they won't take away my desire to be free. Tonight, I'm leaving here, even if it's the last thing I do. His hands trembled as he clutched a small bundle of clothes to his chest. With adrenaline coursing through him, David slipped through the orphanage corridors, timing his escape perfectly during the chaos of the staff shift change. The rain fell harder now, masking the sound of Finally, I can close my eyes without fear of being woken up by screams or slaps, he thought, exhaustion pulling him into sleep. Here in this old machine, I feel more at home than in that orphanage. Tomorrow, I'll figure out what to do with my life. But for today, I just want to sleep in peace. Unbeknownst to David, another soul wandered the same shadowy halls. Michael, a 45-year-old man with greying hair and tired eyes, moved slowly through the factory, his lantern casting flickering shadows on the walls. This place had once been his pride, his family's legacy, but now it stood empty, a tomb of broken dreams. "How did I let everything get to this point?" Michael murmured, his voice heavy with regret. "How did I allow them to destroy the dream of so many generations?" His fingers traced the dust-covered control panels, memories flooding back, workers bustling in white uniforms, the comforting hum of machines. His mother's proud smile as she supervised production. For a moment, he Finally, I can close my eyes without fear of being woken up by screams or slaps, he thought, exhaustion pulling him into sleep. Here in this old machine, I feel more at home than in that orphanage. Tomorrow, I'll figure out what to do with my life. But for today, I just want to sleep in peace." Unbeknownst to David, another soul wandered the same shadowy halls. Michael, a 45-year-old man with greying hair and tired eyes, moved slowly through the factory, his lantern casting flickering shadows on the walls. This place had once been his pride, his family's legacy, but now it stood empty, a tomb of broken dreams. "How did I let everything get to this point?" Michael murmured, his voice heavy with regret. "How did I allow them to destroy the dream of so many generations?" His fingers traced the dust-covered control panels, memories flooding back, workers bustling in white uniforms, the comforting hum of machines, his mother's proud smile as she supervised production. The familiar hum of machinery filled the air, breathing life into a place that had stood silent for far too long. Michael didn't realize it then, but his quest to resurrect the past was about to put an innocent boy's life in grave danger. "That's it, my dears," Michael whispered, his voice trembling with emotion as he coaxed the machines back to life. "Show that there is still life here, that not everything is lost. Mom always said that as long as the machines sang, there would always be hope. There would be hope." He stood amidst the whirring and clanking, memories flooding him like a tide he couldn't hold back. Tonight, they would sing again. Tonight, he would prove her right. But just as the cacophony grew louder, another sound pierced through the mechanical symphony. Screams. High-pitched, terrified screams. Michael froze, his blood running cold. Those weren't the sounds of gears grinding or belts slipping. They were human. Pure terror echoed from somewhere deep within the factory. His dark brown eyes widened. "I'll find a way to get you out of there, even if it's the last thing I do. I won't let another life be lost because of my recklessness," Michael shouted, his voice raw with desperation. "God, if you're listening, help us now." Falling to his knees before the monstrous machine, Michael felt utterly defeated. The strong wind began to howl through the broken windows, and lightning split the sky, announcing a violent storm. Tears streamed down his face as he clasped his hands in fervent prayer. "My God, I know I haven't been the best of men. I've made mistakes that brought me here. But please don't let this child suffer because of me. I've already lost my family, my dignity, and this factory. I can't bear the death of an innocent on my shoulders. Do something, anything, but save this boy." His choked plea reverberated through the cavernous space. Mingling with the thunderclaps that rolled closer and closer, the wind intensified, rattling the old windows in their frames. And then, 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 and then,